Welcome to this video. In this video I'll speak about a chapter from Jung's collected works, volume 8, I think it is, Die Dynamik des Unbewussten. And the chapter is entitled Analytische Psychologie und Weltanschauung, Analytical Psychology and Weltanschauung. He starts off by noting that Weltanschauung cannot really be translated, but if I was to give it a try, I'd probably translate it as something along the lines of worldview, or I'd probably say cosmogony. I've written about, attempted to write about cosmogonies in a book that I wrote entitled An Always Within a Never. Surprise, the always is the cosmogony. Taking it away. Buy the book anyways. Find the link in the comments. No, but Jung means something else with Weltanschauung as well. So cosmogony, just for those who are not initiated, is a structure of well, it's basically a tenet, it's a central tenet, central axiom that guides you and or a given culture through the world, and we can compare it to the guiding principles of a given culture or a given context, which are passed on through rituals, through stories, mythology. And Jung starts the chapter by noting that basically Weltanschauung for him means a certain alignment of psychological content, and this reminds us of the Ich complex that we've spoken about. What is also very fascinating, and I have to admit I read this chapter for the first time in a very long time. I read it before apparently, but it sort of slipped my mind. It went, it moved to the back of my mind. But I read it for the first time in a while today, and in preparation for this talk, and it's very interesting because it gives a very similar metaphor to describe Weltanschauung and its effects to the metaphor that we have developed for the mind that has to do with the city, where we imagine the city, a town that was governed by a certain central government. Well, Jung gives the metaphor of an army. Very, very interesting. Well, he just want to check this because this is interesting. He gave this. This is a talk he gave in 1927 in Karlsruhe. It's very interesting because he gives this army metaphor where he speaks about Schützengräben, the front lines of the First World War, and of course Jung had some anticipatory dreams of the Second World War. Anyways, I don't want to linger with that, and I think this is an edited version from later anyways, because the chapter also appeared in Man in Search for a Soul, Seelenprobleme der Gegenwart in German, which is very difficult to get a copy of actually, at least in 2022 when I'm recording this. I struggled to get a copy of the German version, Seelenprobleme der Gegenwart. It's because I think most of the essays are actually contained in this volume 8. I think most of the relevant ones anyways, and well, I secured a copy a while ago, but I was always thinking about selling it again because I don't really need it. Anyways, it's great that it's a great book. The translation in English is a great book, so I don't know what the organization of the English versions of the collected works are, so I recommend you buy that book if it contains the same chapters. So what I want to move on to is a page in this chapter where he mentions something very interesting in my opinion. First of all, he has a whole tenet, a whole tangent where he speaks about the difference between Freudian psychoanalysis and Jungian analytical psychology, and why we should never call analytical psychology psychoanalysis. very interesting section for those interested. I will not go through this, maybe in another video. For us, or for me, what's most interesting is page 4 of 6 in my version. That's paragraph 7 and 12, following, where he speaks about these autonomous contents that we've discussed. We've discussed autonomous contents in the context of Geist, and we talked about, still very hot tea. In previous videos we talked about the influence that these autonomous contents can have on the existence of consciousness. I think I haven't gone that far in these lectures to talk about the conscious mind as being solely constituted by autonomous contents. I'm not sure if I've gone that far, but if I haven't, I'll just anticipate it now. So the proposition that I'll develop throughout these talks is that basically there is no such thing as a conscious mind with content. Basically there is no content whatsoever that anyone really owns. But there's a structure of debt that exists that is given out between people as a sort of a fictional debt, as similar to the principles of money, where money is actually, or what a dollar bill represents, is actually debt that the bank owes to you. So it's a promise that the bank will pay you out the equal value of that dollar in actual money. So and that used to be gold, the gold standard. But the bills we have are more or less. I mean, at least in classical financial theory, I'm not an expert so much in financial theory and economics, but at least in classical financial theory, these bills are just representations of debt. But for our metaphor, it doesn't matter if that's correct or not. For our metaphor, what matters is that contents of consciousness function in a similar manner, according to Jung's analytical psychology, using the correct terminology here. So essentially, what happens is, and again, I will get into this in more detail in later videos, but what happens is there are certain contents that are lended between people. So, for example, the image of being a good father, I will lend that image to my daughter by, making her think she knows what a good father is by observing me, because I'm the only, I'm the person she projects the archetype of the father on, and and I have a certain conception of what a good father is. That's why I enact elements of it by actions or by words. I'll tell her, a good father should apologies. A good father should be there in any given situation, and so on. And she will accept that or adapt that image and accept it into her, integrate it into her linearity. Remember, we've spoken about the Ich complex at the center. So she'll integrate this into her linearity and rely on that for the apprehension of any other fatherly figure. When she, for example, encounters the father of a friend, she'll judge based on this infliction. But this is, of course, not the only infliction she'll get. She'll have maybe a boyfriend at some point. Now she's very young, but at some point she'll have a boyfriend, and she'll encounter his father, or maybe a girlfriend encounter her father. Never know. And in that moment, that her own image of a father will be shaped and changed. It will be transformed. Perhaps lightly, perhaps severely. We all maybe have instances in which we were sort of shaken. Where I myself, I studied abroad and lived with a family abroad when I was younger, and so there I encountered entirely different mother and father images, especially mother images. That changed my perception of the contents of the mother archetype. We've spoken about that an archetype itself doesn't have content, so it's filled with content that's borrowed. and it's again, it's not my content, but so can I say that my own father image is my father's content? Well, not really, right? Because he has borrowed it from his father, and many others, perhaps. It has been shaped by many sources, so elements of it have been borrowed. He owes a debt to others, and so another consequence of this debt is that, so when my daughter owes a significant amount of her debt to me, so she owes, let's say, well, let's put it differently. Let's start with the debt metaphor on the debts on the money side, on the monetary policy side. Let's say I buy this house that I live in, and I finance it with that debt, and I have $500,000 debt to the bank, and I pay a certain amount of money, like $10,000 a month. I pay to the bank, but now suddenly the bank. So there are multiple consequences already, right? First, I enter into sort of a fiduciary relationship with the bank, right? I owe money to it, which means that the bank has a certain, well, that I have to do something, perform something, a certain ritual act that maintains the bank's existence, right? So the fact that the bank is owed money, means that the bank exists, right? It's a two-way street in a way. But what also is the case is that I can be judged by the bank as, well, let's just put it in easier terms. The bank can enforce that debt. If I fail to pay, the bank can say, okay, wait, you owe me money. Give me back my money, right? And then I can say, no, I don't anymore. It's paid off. It's paid off. I don't know it. But the bank can say, no, look, these are the facts. This is the truth. We've made this contract. And ultimately, I can be taken to court, and ultimately I have to pay. So, similar, I want to apply this metaphor to the structure of these conscious contents of consciousness. These elements. So, here you have certain content that fills the gap, the shape of the father archetype, and that I inhabit, or that I have integrated into my linearity, that I owe to my father. And so what can happen now is either, well, I have a certain fiduciary relationship to my father, right? I have to perform certain rituals because he's my father. I call him every other day, and so on. But also, if I now suddenly start to treat him like a completely different person, I fully believe it. I start to treat him like, let's say, I don't know, a friend. But let's give a real life example. My wife and her mother have a, not the typical wife-mother, daughter-mother relationship, but more her mother behaves more like a friend to her, and my wife struggles with that, and because she's looking to, I think I've said that before in another video, she's looking for, she's looking to situate a certain manifestation in the mother archetype template, and her mother doesn't fulfill that, and conversely, her mother has given her a certain mother image that doesn't match what she now comes to feel as the actual mother image. Okay, so it doesn't match the mother archetype, but our mother, of course, says, no, I'm the best mother. So now, there's a friction. Do you see that? There's a friction that's occurring in this the structure that she inhabits. And the question is, I want to draw that back, or draw the line back to the fact that this originates in a certain depth. So in that this calls into question who owns this content. Who owns what you conceive of as a mother? Where is this located? Where is this content located? And so this is the one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, of course, that why do you have this urge to find someone who fills this gap of the mother archetype. What does that mean? Well, it means there's another level of autonomy, which we've spoken about, which is the archetype, which is this sort of template that allows a certain crystal to grow without dictating what the crystal will look like in particular. And so now we can turn to, so it's a brief introduction. It's fine if you don't get this whole theory of depth yet. You shall be further educated in forthcoming videos. So what we have to maintain, though, and what's important to notice, is that there are autonomous contents, so contents that we identify with as, you know, conscious subjects that are autonomous from us, and that are not necessarily owned by anyone. You can't say, this is the origin of this particular image of a father. You know, like, you can't say, I don't know, who's pretty these days, like, Angelina Jolie is the origin of beauty. Like, she's not, you know, like, you know, she may be a particular manifestation of beauty, but she's not the origin of beauty, let alone the origin of every man's conception of beauty, you know. But so it's important that we recognize that there are these autonomous complexes that can sort of attach to someone. So we spoke about this, we call this Geist, and the Geist possesses someone. And now, if we stay with this image of possession, Jung gives an interesting, on page 406, he gives an interesting metaphor. He says that essentially these contents possess our minds to the point that, and this is especially true for the autonomy of the archetypal structures, to a point that they make a demand on consciousness, so they threaten consciousness by making the demands that they make. So their autonomy threatens the stability of consciousness. Now, why do we need consciousness? Well, we've spoken about this, I think, very briefly, but consciousness essentially is a function to allowing us to function in this world. I couldn't speak without it. It has a self-regulatory function. It has a regulatory function on the level of society. It has a function on the level of communication. You know, I couldn't communicate without it, probably. Well, very likely. Communicate on another level, but language certainly depends on it in Jung's conception. And so he basically says or suggests that that sort of we have to sort of struggle to ban these ghosts. So we have to sort of exercise the ghosts. Almost not exercise is probably the wrong word, because that would mean you want to get rid of them. That's not the case. You have to, because they are ultimately, we depend on them. We depend on these templates, these archetypal structures that within which we situate certain contents. But we have to find a way to ban them, so to make them, to discharge them of their weaponry, if you will. And Jung mentions, and so okay, let me just turn back. So, when does an archetype become threatening? I'm probably gonna have to make another video following this one, because I'm gonna keep them to 30 minutes. But I think I can't. I'm afraid this is not going to be comprehensive after 30 minutes, but I'll try. So when does an archetype become threatening or an autonomous content? Well, remember how I said just a minute ago that your father or my father, for that matter, may enforce a certain image. So you may say, okay, you may want to be my friend, but I'm your father. This is what being a father means. You know, this for example, a very prominent example of this is when you're young, like say 10, you project a God image on your parents, and you'll think they can do everything. You know, they're the smart, and some of us carry that with us for a while. But at some point, let's say when we're when we're hitting puberty, we'll realize that that's bullshit. You know, like our parents don't know everything. They have weaknesses. They have failures. They're simple. It's like you see a beautiful house and then you go in and you realize it's just falling apart. And the facade may be nice, but also when you look closer, the facade isn't so nice. It's kind of molds. Everything is moldy and all. So this is really what happens. This is really characteristic of sort of this projected fictional image that we have breaking down. So the fictional image that was, that we have established of them. So this is the most important point. We take a content of them, we abstract that content, we create a fictional content out of it that makes sense within the web of association. So within this linear narrative, within this web of associations that our conscious minds constitute, governed by this ich complex. And so in this fictionalization of a certain element that exists somehow in real life, or the ownership of which exists in real life, I'll get to what I mean by real life in a second. When that breaks down, where we may be shattered, we experience discomfort. And what I mean by real life here is sort of in this context, I would say the locus of control over certain content, because that ultimately, the only reality we know is the effects of things on our consciousness. Oh, I said things. The effects of happenings in our consciousness and on our ich structure, right? That's all we know. We've established that. But reality, we can counterpose that with reality in this context by saying that there's another locus in which certain elements that we integrate and subjugate with this narrative in our consciousness, where we create sort of this fictional linearity, but there is they exist outside. So there's another locus where they're situated. So this rupturing of autonomous contents, on this rupturing effect that autonomous contents may have on that fictionalization that's integrated into our ego, threatens the entire structure of the ego, right, or this ich complex, because this fictional element had a certain position within the corpus, within the narrative body, if you will, to use a metaphor I used somewhere else, within this narrative body of our psyche. And so there's this gap, right? There's this gap, this hole that's sort of shot in there. And so this is all something we'll return to later in more detail. So what I want to get at today is, in the last 7 minutes of this video, is Jung's assertion of the fact that these threats have to be banned. And what I found so striking in this chapter is that he suggests that that this can be done by externalizations like religion or ritual, right? This is, I think this is genius. It's one of these things that I knew it, but I didn't read it spelled out, because there's this book by, you just get it. Now you know I'm in a real room, not on a green screen. There's a book by Erich Neumann. It's called Tiefenpsychologie und Neue Ethik. And Neumann, it's one of my favorite, it's a book I used a lot. And it talks about the necessity to introspect, so to turn from the projection outwards towards the introjection inwards. And I've used this a lot in speaking about the individuation, a notion that we'll also get to. And the point that I'm trying to make is that Jung says, look, these threatening contents have to be banned, so they have a certain danger. And what our goal as peoples is that, as conscious people, is that we have to protect consciousness on the first level. Because that's our livelihood, right? That's our livelihood. And how do we do that? Well, and Jung suggests, well, there are ways to ban them in religious practices, mysticism. But in any case, it's an interaction with the autonomous contents, right? Whether it's externalized or internalized. And Neumann suggests that there's a movement in modernity to internalize rather than externalize. He connects that, and Jung agrees here, and he has a piece of work called the undiscovered self. I think he wrote it pretty late in his life, and he talks about this gesture of introjection or introspection, both are okay, I think, where you start to sort of you move away from the collective practice of a certain confrontation or encounter with an archetype, with the aim to ban it or tame it, which takes place in myth. And you go away from that towards a sort of an individually practiced encounters, voluntary encounters. This is really getting to the core and to the heart of the pinnacle of these sessions, where I'm trying to say, look, the point and function of the self is not some individualistic development or unfolding of individualistic tendencies, although it appears to be. But the point is really a deeply collective endeavor. It's really it's the association with the collective via the encounter of the collective. So the elements that are not autonomous. With the elements that are autonomous, that are not owned by me. The movement away from the fictionality of this full ownership of these contents towards the realization that I am actually not me. I'm a stranger, and I have to get to know that, you know. To round this off, and at least some I'll talk about this chapter. Jung speaks of this difference between Einstellung and Weltanschauung. So for him, Einstellung is an unconscious tendency towards acting in a certain way. That is to say, Einstellung is simply what we've talked about as the Ich complex. Weltanschauung for Jung, as opposed to that, is being aware, witnessing this Einstellung, being aware of its elements, not changing it. He doesn't talk about willfully changing elements of it. He simply says, you're aware, you see it. Schauen. You know, schauen in German. Sehen, means, schaue einen Film, I'm watching a movie. I look at a movie. What are you doing? Well, you're witnessing the movie. You're not shaping, you're not making it, you're not creating it. It's not saying Weltschöpfung, He's saying the unconscious things on pages 397 to 401. He's saying that the unconscious, and that's his major upside as opposed to Freud, has a creative aspect. It creates, it makes, it shapes you. It is you. It's you. And what you do is you don't try to fix that wound, but you witness it. You let it create. You encounter it. You witness it. I think this is a major point, and he says this is really the movement towards higher, he says higher consciousness, ironically enough. What we would think of higher consciousness, and this is what my main critique of the self and general explanations of the self, what we think of as higher consciousness is, full control of everything that I am. But that's not the case. It doesn't seem to be. What seems to be the case is you witness the unfolding of the unconscious and understand that's outside of your control. You understand that you're a witness. You are a participant in you. You participate in your own being. Because there is only one being, essentially. And that's what you're participating in. And so I want to close here and really, I'll pick this up in another lecture. I'll make this a theme. And thank you very much for joining.